All right, we're going live. Do you think, Paul?
Yeah, that's good.
That work?
That'll work. Let me go get my let me go get my guitar over here. I'll just join in.
You should have. Oh, that would have been a really cool way to
Well,
start.
that's pretty straightforward tune, so I can play with that.
Well, welcome everyone back once again to our LinkedIn live sessions, and today we have Paul Cheney with us. So hi Paul, thanks again for being here with us today.
Happy to be here.
And Paul Cheney, quick introduction, is a freelancer. We were just talking about the etymology of the words. Do you want to give us a quick background on what freelancing means?
Oh, well, freelancing is you can't keep a job, so you just work for yourself, basically. Actually, though, is the word etymology or etymology, right? It goes back in the Middle Ages or whenever that these knights would hire themselves. They were like, I guess, mercenaries. They would hire themselves out. They would be freelancers. That's where the term comes from. So I'm going to get, in addition to all this junk back behind me, I'm going to find a statue, I guess, of a knight with a lance. And, there we go. But I'm a freelance writer, B2B writer, editor, and digital marketer. And I also teach digital marketing at a university level to adult students, not to 18-year-olds. Nothing against 18-year-olds, but I'm better with adults.
Well, you're not officially an adult until you're 22, right?
I don't know. Is that the case nowadays? I don't know when you become adult nowadays. I won't tell you my age, but I'm still wondering if I've made the cut. So,
hopefully, no one's ever an adult, and we're all kids at heart.
Well, in my mind, I'm 18 again, and
it's young at heart. But when I studied neurology, and all of you neurologists now can pound me telling me I'm wrong, and all the books I studied were wrong, but the way the brain develops is we're not fully there yet until we're 22. But
okay, all right.
I'm sure there's a huge discussion around that, and we're here to talk about stories. We started with the one already, and there's another thing that you're missing: your podcast, Freelancing After 50.
Yeah, that's right. I do a podcast and a newsletter. You can go to freelancingafter50, FIFTY.com. So it's 50 spelled out. And you can access the podcast. You can also access the newsletter or link to the newsletter from there. I do both of those things bi-weekly if I'm not sidetracked with work. The idea is every 2 weeks the podcast and the newsletter come out, and I provide a wealth of information, and I have great freelancers on who tell their stories. I also have SMEs on who provide great advice to freelancers, not just people over 50, but anybody's freelancer. Like, for example, I just had someone on who talked about investing. We talked about taxes. We talked about just how you structure your finances from a business perspective. I've got a guy on that's coming soon that we're going to be talking about paying taxes. Now, this is maybe more U.S.
But that would probably be good for me.
Well, maybe so, yeah. And, I've got, again, freelancers who share their stories. So I try to find interesting guests who, really have something to contribute that I think would be of value to listeners. We try to keep it around 20 minutes, so it's not too long. The newsletter, I share my bit, and then I curate a lot of information, generally focused on a topic per newsletter. And like recently, I talked about freelancing during a recession, whether we're in a full-blown recession or not. Here's how you need to be thinking and acting. And, is this a time to start freelancing? And I contend that it is. And I talk about some of the reasons why. So that's kind of the focus.
So there's a huge passion around that. And we could probably do another session on freelancing and
yeah, well, I know I had a friend of mine who sent me, it's a LinkedIn article or something they just featured about freelancing is in. So I'm going to take some time today to read that and see what's up with that. That might inspire a newsletter, so.
I look forward to reading that, and I'm sure the rest of us do as well. Before I go in, you suggested the title B2B Storytelling Lessons from a Teapot. I'm not going to ask you now why a teapot. I think I can guess from the notes that you shared with me, but I'm assuming that everyone has the same question of why you chose a teapot in the title. This is one of your storytelling tricks, tactics. You're not calling yourself a teapot?
It's useful. Well, I am. Well, we'll get to it. I want to keep people in suspense for a little while, but we'll get to the teapot part. We've got some other stuff to talk about first as it relates to B2B storytelling, and everything I do is B2B because I'm just not a B2C oriented person. It's all about B2B to me. And that's kind of where I hang my hat these days.
Fantastic. All right, cool. So I look forward to hearing your presentation. I'll bring it up on screen. I want to start by asking you a couple of questions.
Certainly.
Before we jump into it, because there's one question that I've always wanted to know. And I think I've swayed from one side of the wall to the other in the last few years. And we'll start off with that question. So as I'll bring up now your PowerPoint, and everyone who not sure who I am, if you can't remember.
You want me to introduce you? I'll introduce
you. That'll be a first. That someone's introduced me.
This is my dear friend Alexandra Cowan, who I've known for a few years maybe now. I don't know how long we've known each other.
Probably more than that now.
And
half a decade, more than that.
No, really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, she's CEO. She, along with her partner David, they have a startup called Repurposed. I guess you'd say. You are the CEO. I refer to you as the front of the house, and David is the back of the house because he's the engineering and programming brains behind all of this. And it's a fantastic platform. I say I haven't really used it that much because it's really more for teams. I'm a team of one, but I don't know. I just she's someone I think the world of, and I'm happy to be associated with she and David and this business that they've started.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. I love that. I'm lost for words, which has never happened before. So thanks. I think
Certainly.
the world of you too. So anyway, we'll get it. Thank you for that. And I really am lost for words, Paul. So Repurpose is, as Paul mentioned, it's an operating system that organizes and structures your entire content management process inside and outside your organization in an agile way. And Paul, the first thing I want to start off with you is obviously, so we're organizing content, and a lot of times one of my customers always ask me, storytelling, art or science? And I've always said it's a bit of an art because I look at my brother and how he tells stories, and I think it's an art. You either know it or you don't. But after reading today everything that you've put together, I think, wow, it's science.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's both art and science. I don't know that the science is now your brother being a television producer, whatever all he does. I know he's very talented in that way. Maybe it's more for him, it's more scientific, but I think it is both art and science. There's an element of science about it, but it's also formula, right? But I think the point I want to get across first and foremost right now is we talk about becoming a story brand. And again, we're talking about B2B here. Okay. Just everybody put that kind of hang on to that. It's a key to capturing customer attention. It's key to capturing trust, communicating value, distinguishing your brand. But the way I like to think of this and sort of set this up is this. So suppose I'm talking to a marketer in a B2B company, right? And I want to ask that person to think of your ideal customer or prospect. Then think about what is the problem that they have. And then how can your company, your product, your service solve that problem? Now frame that up in the form of a story, okay? But when we think about brand storytelling, and that's essentially what we're talking about, that's kind of a staple in B2B marketing, but we're talking about B2B, and that's a little different animal here. But I think, yes, it's more difficult maybe to engage when you have a longer sales cycle in a B2B environment than you do with B2C. I mean, B2C, you're selling some flashy product. Maybe there's a little bit of research done by the consumer, more or less. But generally, it's a transaction that takes place pretty quickly. With B2B, it's a whole different kind of deal. So how do you incorporate storytelling in a B2B format? Well, we're going to get into the details about that. But I first want to cite a statistic that comes from Google. It's research by Google that says 50% of B2B buyers are more likely to make a purchase if they connect to a brand on an emotional level. Now, Google's research also looked at B2C, and here's what they found out regarding B2C, that most emotional connections on a B2C level are between 10 and 40%. So here we are with 50% from B2B. So it's significantly more emotionally connected than with B2C. But it's not just an emotional connection. It's also a psychological connection. And I want to move to the slide that shows the brain and all of that. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about the psychological aspects of this. We've got the emotional aspects. We kind of understand that, right? Emotion, whatever. But stories share information. The main purpose of storytelling is to share plots and narratives that hold a deeper meaning. Storytelling fosters connection. It births in its audience an understanding of deep emotions such as happiness, sadness, anger, joy. When you think about reading or listening to a story, it creates an experience, right? With which you can identify, and it causes you to think, you get involved. So as a marketer, you can take advantage of that to try to create that connection with your audience. It also enhances the imagination. It taps different sections of the brain, as you can kind of see from this graphic here. So maybe as a marketer, you might think about creating some kind of visual experience for your audience, for example. It also promotes order and promotes thinking. Good storytelling has order to it. There's a beginning, there's the middle, there is the end, and there is what we call the story arc, right? And no story is a good story if it doesn't have that arc. And we're going to talk about what that arc involves here in just a minute. But you don't have something that begins haphazardly at the beginning or haphazardly at the end. There is order to it. There's specific order. There's a specific pattern. So that makes the story easier to understand and to consume. And as I said, it's not just emotion, it's also gets you thinking. There's also the psychological element. There's the logic behind it. And let me just share, this is a statistic that comes from the London School of Business. They found that people have different rates of retention based on how information is delivered. For example, if you do what I've just been doing, sharing stats like I'm doing right now, you're only going to retain 5 to 10% of what you hear. If I couple that with a picture, the retention rate jumps to 25%. But if I turn that into a story to convey the same information, your retention jumps to 65 to 70%. Why? Well, for all the reasons that I just mentioned. You're sharing information, you're fostering a connection, you're enhancing imagination. There's, again, that sense of order to it. But I think there's something that, to me, and this is kind of a personal thing, maybe, is particularly with a B2B environment. When we're thinking B2B, business to business, B2B is also H to H, human to human. As I like to say it, B2B is people too. And so when you let customers see you, your company, your employees, maybe the executive staff, CEO, on a more personal level, here's what it does. It helps to foster authenticity. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. It helps to differentiate your business. It boosts brand awareness. It builds better customer relationships. And it's a way to highlight your unique value or your unique selling point. Let me share a quote with you that comes from Tom Corson Knowles. He's an author. He says this: as human beings, we're brought up to understand the world around us based on stories that we're told. I am absolutely convinced that there is a special part of our brain that is really designed to process stories. We have an amazing power to understand and get lost in and find ourselves in stories. It is an extraordinarily efficient and powerful way to communicate lessons and knowledge. If you think about it, why do we binge watch television? You know, we want to know what happens next. I mean, my wife and I will literally sit down and watch 6 episodes of something in one night. We will blow through an entire series in 2 or 3 days sometimes. You know, it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm falling asleep in my chair. My wife's, we're saying, oh, there's one more episode, right? Why? Because we want to know what happens next. And we don't like having to wait a week to do it. You know, the series Better Call Saul. I guess they have that in Spain, the UK, or whatever. But okay, you know, it was only coming out once a week. It was like, this is terrible. You know, we got to wait a week to see what Saul does next. You know, and that kind of, or what happens
till the end to watch them all together and binge watch it, because I can't wait a week.
That's the thing to do, you know. And what happened to Kim? What was going to happen to Kim? That was the real question. But I mentioned one thing that I want to.
It reminds me. Sorry, before you go on, it reminds me a little bit about what you're mentioning here about we remember stories. If you think about it, we aren't born scared. We're not scared of the dark. But we remember stories. We see, we watch, we're told, you know, if we do this, bad things will happen, or we remember Halloween stories. I don't know. I don't like doing the trick or treat anymore, because I remember when I was 14. So we're talking decades ago now. Just yesterday, guys. Just yesterday. So when I was 14, I'd be told, you know, people would put things, you know, inside the chocolate bars. But I was told the most horrific stories are about certain neighbors not to knock on their doors. And I remember the stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's what we remember. We remember stories. So let me tell you a little bit of a story that focuses on this idea of authenticity and maybe transparency. Now, by the way, I understand authenticity, transparency, cliche-esque words, but I think we
also
really
need to define here a little bit what they mean, because there are a lot of taboo words of being authentic.
Right.
People try to be authentic. They try to be what other people think they're supposed to be.
Right.
But that's
that is certainly not authentic. Well, I'm going to tell you a story that will answer that question. And here it is. It's the story of the Velveteen Rabbit. And it's the scene where the Velveteen Rabbit is with the Skin Horse. And the Velveteen Rabbit, I'm not going to try to, maybe I will, maybe try to mimic the rabbit and the horse. The rabbit asks, "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside of you in a stick-out handle?" The Skin Horse said, "Real isn't how you were made. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Well, does it happen all at once, like being wound up, or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the Skin Horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't always happen to people who break easily or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off." Obviously, you can see that I'm very real. "Your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby." This is really talking about me, by the way. "But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand." Now, let me apply that to a brand or a business setting. You know, sometimes we want everything to be, from a marketing standpoint, everything to be slick. You know, we present this persona or this image of ourselves. And I don't know. To me, it's all about pulling back the curtain and letting people see you and your business behind the scenes. And sometimes it ain't all that pretty, okay? Sometimes it means telling a story that you would rather not tell, or admitting something that you'd rather not admit. To me, that's being transparent. That's being genuine. That's being authentic. But I think those are the kind of stories that people appreciate and they connect with. So when it gets back to some of the benefits of storytelling, that whole idea of authenticity, hopefully I've described it well using this nursery story. Hopefully I've gotten that point across. But I'm going to get to the teapot too. I know the teapot was a question. We're about to get into that, but I want to talk real quickly about 3 categories of story. And I believe you have a slide that maybe illustrates that.
I do indeed.
First of all, there is the brand storytelling. Now that's pretty self-explanatory. That's telling stories about your brand and what it stands for. Maybe it's the history of your company, the mission, the ethos, the values you espouse, or whatever. So that's brand storytelling. Then there's audience-centered storytelling, and that's storytelling where you align the narrative to fit your buyers or your prospects or your customers' pain points. Now, some examples of that might be something as simple as a blog post, or maybe a customer success story. I don't know if maybe a white paper would necessarily fit in there, or some kind of financial document. And by the way, not everything that you're going to create is going to be a story, okay? But where you can do it, that's great. Now, there's a great book out there that I always recommend to people. It's called They Ask, You Answer. They Ask, You Answer by Marcus Sheridan. And basically,
I think that was one of the first books I read.
Yep.
I think it's to do with marketing. I think it's
And by the way,
other than how to make it stick or make it sticky.
Make it stick. Yeah. By the way, quick aside, Marcus was a recent guest on my podcast, just saying. And we talked about how They Ask You Answer applies. But to me, that's kind of where we're going with this. Here's the problem that they have, right? So I'm going to address that and try to do it in the form of a story. So audience-centered storytelling, and then individual storytelling. And that's where stories focus on a person. That person might be an employee. It might be a customer. Again, a customer success story. Maybe it's the CEO sharing a story of the origin story of the company, or how they got started out and some of the struggles they faced. Again, that's being real, right? That's the authenticity side of things. But it's personalized to the individual. So brand storytelling, the story of the brand, audience-centered, focusing on the character. We'll get to that in just a minute. The audience, and then individual, focusing on a person, whomever that person might be.
Do you mind if we just recap this again? Because I love this.
Go ahead.
When we think of a story, we mash it all together. And I think as marketers, we try to create a story that includes all 3 concepts.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I have in the past, and I know that thinking about it, we talk about brands, we talk about our audience, and then we include in our audience the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think about separating that. And I think that's a really good point.
Well, and we're going to apply this to what I refer to as the customer journey. I think you may have a different term for it, or the buyer journey, the 3 stages. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But drum roll, please. Let's talk about what makes up a story. What are the elements of an actual story? Let's get over to that. And this is where we're going to be talking about the teapot. Okay.
Oops.
And that's
have I
good.
Not put 3 elements.
Just keep going.
Keep
going.
Okay. No, here
yeah,
we go.
we're going to keep going. On.
Seeing as we're on the 3 elements. So brand story, just to reiterate. So we're talking about when you're talking stories about your vision, mission,
your values, the values of your company, your ethos. You could also be talking about how your brand is involved in the community, or focused on a particular kind of, mission, so to speak. Maybe it's something that involves a charitable organization or something of that nature. You could talk about that. That is all part of brand storytelling. It's wherever it involves your brand.
And are you like me when you think brand includes the people inside your company?
Well, they do.
They carry out the brand.
We do.
Or are we talking about company, collective?
Well, we're thinking more collective here, but I mean, obviously a brand or company is made up of individuals, but I'm separating those out into different categories, if that makes sense. Okay.
Audience-centered is what we just spoke about. Marcus Sheridan, ask your audience. Every time your audience asks you a question, You answer that with a piece of content, and you use that piece of content in the form of blog posts, LinkedIn messages, webinars, videos. You
There you
create
go. Yeah.
content around to teach and educate and
Right.
answer.
Right.
And then the individual, or have I missed something there?
Nope. And if you want to go ahead to the next slide, I think you've got a couple of examples showing.
I do indeed.
And so this, by the way, I did a presentation for a particular audience. And so this is an example that I shared with them. This is a blog post. Notice the title: Labor Void Threatens Domestic Contact Centers. So this was for a BPO, or a business process outsourcing audience. But notice the title: Labor Void Threatens Domestic. And notice the beginning: a gap in talent is following closely behind. Economists are at a loss trying to predict what pattern will emerge. So there is certainly fodder for story right there, because immediately from the title, you've got this sense of conflict, right? If you want to move on to the next one. So that would be an audience-centric example. Here's one. This comes from, I believe, Microsoft, and it's focused on an employee. She's one of the executives in the company. The chief accessibility officer is what she does. And this is a story from inside Microsoft journey to design a more accessible world. And it's a focus on this particular employee. So that would be considered an individual story. Okay. And it's just a kind of I think more of a Q&A,
Okay.
maybe. Yeah.
So this is a way to make your company more accessible to people. So it's an accessible company. We're getting to know you as a company, as a brand, and as individuals
through this employee primarily, and
through the story of the employee.
Exactly.
And that the brand is made up of people just like you and I and everyone else.
Yeah. And let me just say too, I think a company really ought to do, there's a wealth of stories in their employee base. And there's interesting stories that can be told. I remember a company I used to work for, which was a contact center company. I was the digital marketing manager for them. And there was this one employee. He was at the management level. And, we did a video about him. He talked about his work, that kind of thing. Boring, But then he talked about the fact that at night he was a DJ, and his name was DJ Space Ghost. And he went into all the reasons why he used that, chose that name and what he did and everything. And suddenly his story got a whole lot more interesting to me. So I think when you introduce, when it comes to maybe less corporate and a little bit more personal, I think that's a good thing, because that's a way for me to get to know you at a personal level. And I always feel like that's a positive kind of thing. Anyway. All right, moving on. Okay, 3 parts to a story: character, conflict, and resolution. Now let's talk about these 3 for just a minute, and we're going to get to the teapot, I promise. Who is the character in your story? Maybe that character is you. Maybe the character, as we just saw in this example, is an employee. Maybe the character is your customer or a prospect. Who is the character? Then conflict. What is the problem that the character is facing? If it's a prospective, a prospect that you're reaching out to or you're connecting with, what problems are they having? What questions do they have? That's the conflict. And look, if a story does not have conflict, it's not a story. When have you ever watched a TV drama that didn't have conflict, right? So you got to have conflict.
Even the news.
Even the news.
There's always a character. There's always conflict. And resolution comes. It makes us want to watch the news again next week.
I don't even watch the news anymore. But resolution is how the story ends. It's the denouement. It is the solution. It's how the character is transformed. Maybe it's the moral of the story, but it's the resolution. It's here's the person, here's the problem that they have, here's how your brand came in to provide a solution to that problem. And in a B2B and marketing context, I believe you should always in that story with a call to action, because you want to pull them down the funnel, which we're going to get to again in a minute. But now, again, drum roll, the teapot example.
Yay!
Okay.
Got
All
through a
right.
teapot.
Here's
Right.
here's why I use the teapot, and I love this. I think some people are going to
I still don't know. I'm about to
it's
find out.
ridiculous, but you all know the nursery rhyme, I'm a little teapot, right? I don't know if that was in the UK. You drink a lot of tea over there, so I would think it is,
That's the
but
first thing that came to mind was actually, well, I had the drinking tea, and then
okay.
it was uh, Princess and the Beast.
I
Goodness,
don't know.
I need to brush up on my story, on my fairy tales.
Yeah, you got me there, but here's the nursery rhyme. I'm gonna sing it. You can sing it with me if you want.
Right.
I'm a little teapot, short and stout. Here is my handle, here is my spout. When I get all steamed up, hear me shout, tip me over and pour me out. Okay, I didn't hear you singing, but we won't go back over that. All right, so that's the story. Now, where's the character? Who's the character? Who's the character in this story? Pretty obvious.
Me.
No,
I'm the teapot.
The teapot, right? Now, if we're thinking about this from a business context, we think about buyer personas. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute, maybe. But what is the persona of the teapot? What do we know about the teapot? He or she is short and stout. They have a handle, has a spout. That their problem is that they get steamed up. Right now, we don't really know if what color the teapot is, if it has a certain decoration or what it's made of, or if there's a tea cozy around it. We don't know what kind of tea is in it, if it's Earl Grey or chamomile. We don't know any of that, but we do know a few things, right? So we think about the character. Then what's the conflict that this character is facing? He's got steamed up, right? That's his problem. He's all steamed up. And so what's he and he's shouting, help me. And so what's the resolution? You tip him or her or they over and you pour them out. You release the steam. You solve the problem. Now, again, that may be a silly little example, but it is everything you need in terms of a story. Character, conflict, and resolution. Now, think about your customer or your prospect as a character. That's why knowing your audience is so critical, and that's where buyer personas come in. Who are they? What are their pain points? What can you do to help solve them? Okay, so when we think about character from this B2B context, let's also think about the buyer persona. I think you have a slide about that. It's just an example I pulled out. This is not even a real one, but you get the point. You need that. You need to know your audience because that is the best way to know how you can resolve the conflict that they're facing. Now, I want to move on quickly, and I want to talk about what I call simply 4 W's and 1 H. All right? And it's why, who, what, how, and where. Now, let's start with, the guy, Simon Sinek. He says what? Start with why. And his golden circle sort of principle is this. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. When it comes down to content creation, storytelling, every piece of content needs a purpose. So the most important question to ask before you create any story is, why are we doing this? Knowing the purpose is foundational. So why? Who? Who is the character that you're creating the story for? What? What are their needs? What are their wants? What are their desires? What are their pain points? What questions are they asking? And then how? How does your product or service address those? And then finally, the where is, where are you going to publish this content? Obviously, you need to publish it in a place it can be found by the people who are looking for it, right? So that may mean doing a good job with SEO so that people who are Googling, they see your content listed there in a front page listing, or put it out on social media, maybe LinkedIn, it becomes a story or a post on LinkedIn, something like that. Or maybe it's a video on YouTube. Maybe it's on TikTok. Maybe that's your thing, whatever. But you want to publish it, obviously, in places where people will find it. Now, pulling this all together is where we get to I think you're calling it story funnel. I love that term. I love that term. We're gonna trademark that term. Let's grab that before anybody else does. But this really is where the to excuse me for this cliche. I'm the king of cliches, by the way, where the rubber meets the road, right? We're not talking about fiction. We're not talking about, fantasy, all that. We're talking about real business application here. So let's think about the
I
story
just saw
funnel.
this and I loved it. I thought this is a story funnel. So
Yeah,
I was
this is
looking at your
great.
notes and I thought this is a true story funnel.
That's just great. I
Okay.
love that. So,
And
but
it's
yeah,
especially when I was thinking about the way we create information for our customers and the way that we're building these stories. As you mentioned before, we have three different types of stories. You have the brand stories, you have your customer, or your I can't even remember the number now. I have to go backwards. We have let me just remember your
audience
audience-centered stories, and your
No,
individual
right.
stories.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about them as they relate to this story funnel or customer journey, whatever term you want to apply.
Story funnel.
Sales people would think of it as a sales funnel, right? So you got awareness, right? People don't know who you are. They don't know about your brand. They're going to Google maybe, and they're inquiring amongst their network or their colleagues. They've got a problem, right? So who are we focused on? Well, we're focused on people. They're the character. Could be a customer, could be a prospect. And the conflict is the problem they have. So what are we going to tell there? We're going to tell audience-centered stories. Could be a blog post. I know we're going to have some examples maybe in a little bit. So we'll go over those.
Before we go down. So we've got audience-centered content and we've got blog posts. So where can we get this information from? So as we were just mentioning, customers ask questions all the time. So we can go to our sales team and ask them, what have been the recurring questions this week that customers have been asking us? Go to the customer success department. What questions are being asked? Go and check out your social media. Check out what questions customers are asking you or prospects are asking you, and those or the webinars and all the questions post webinar that are being asked. And that's where you grab your content, or that's what I would suggest. Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul. We grab our content here in the audience-centered stories, and this is where we start creating content, and this is where we create the character character audience-centered stories.
Problem. Yeah. Every story has got a character, but the character here is
the audience,
is the customer, the prospect, most likely, right? But we're at the awareness level. And of course, the whole idea of a funnel is to go down the funnel. Now, funnel may be a little bit of an archaic concept, but we're going to go with it because it's a useful model. But we come now to interest. So people have become aware of the brand. They think maybe you've got a possible solution. So where's the focus? It's still on people. It may still be on the audience, but maybe we introduce some new characters. That character might be a brand story. It might be an employee story. It might be a customer success story. So you're telling the story of a customer who's done business with you, and here's the positive result that they got. And we're also beginning to introduce the idea of the resolution, that your brand can provide the solution to the problem that they're facing. Now, when we get down to the next level decision, it changes a little bit. Now, you're still probably doing some brand storytelling. You're still doing individual storytelling. Now, maybe you're introducing customer testimonials, for example, because now I need that social proof to help make sure that I'm making the right decision. But we're also beginning to shift the focus away from people to product or service. And, again, not everything you're going to share in terms of content is going to be a story. A data sheet, if you're selling a technical product, is not a story necessarily. If it's some kind of financial document, it may not be, in the form of a story. If it's a white paper, may or may not be a form of a story, depending on what the focus is, if it's very technical or something like that. And again, that also goes back to the audience that you're speaking to. If you're trying to convince engineers that or scientists that your product's a good one, maybe, it doesn't involve a story. So not everything
I think it also goes back to what you were saying before. At the awareness stage, we really want to be telling those stories, because this brings us back to the London School of Economics, the data that you're saying. Yes. So the awareness stage, stories, they hook people, people's memory retention by 65% to 70%. If
Right.
you start giving stats or stats with image, people are only retaining 25% of that information. So if you've already hooked them at the awareness stage with 70% memory, and you've got them down to interest by decision, they've got their memory, you're in the front of their memory, you've got them down to decision, you can add some stats there, and some images, because you're just you're layering on now extra bits
Exactly.
of information
Yep.
with stats, with images, infographics, whatever it is, that doesn't that isn't a surplus, and which is going to interest them, because those are the bits they're now looking for, because they've already got that story created, which you've already created for
Right.
them.
Right.
The
Well,
problem is,
yeah, you've already created a narrative. You started a narrative at least, and now it's kind of episodic, right? If I watch a series on TV, there's episode 1, episode 2, and those do the same thing, do they not? If you think about story, you think about the characters, you're going to learn more about the characters in episode 2. Maybe episode 3 introduces a new character, for example, and there's this growing depth. If it's a good story, well, this is the same kind of thing. The awareness level is an introduction. It's the beginning, right? The interest is you're still telling stories, but maybe it's not a different story, but maybe it's different characters that you're focusing on. And that's kind of the idea that I really want to kind of get across there. So, yeah. But action, that, like I said, have a call to action of some kind. Keep pulling them down that funnel so that one thing leads to another, leads to another. But whether or not everything is a story, probably not going to be. Everything's not a story, but you certainly want to use story to the degree possible for all the reasons that we established earlier on in our conversation.
perfect. I saw that you gave some examples of.
Yeah, if we could run
awareness.
through those real quickly, I'll quickly, again, this was for a particular audience that I was doing a presentation for. This is Instagram. This is a company called Clark Bills. They're a construction company, and they're just sharing. Look, there's images, there's video content, various things like that. An image is a story. I mean, a picture. What is it?
Picture's worth 1,000 words.
Thank you very much. So that's a story. So they're doing that, doing a good job of it. If you want to go on to the next one. This was also Instagram, and this is an architectural firm, I believe, out of New York. And if you look at the over to the right there, 145 Central Park North, that is, I think, maybe a video or at least a series of photos about a project that they worked on. So again, that's a way to tell a story. If we go to the next one, and this is, is this?
Yeah, there's loads of videos, which is
Oh
great.
no, this is TikTok. Okay, thank you. This is TikTok, and this is these guys are they're a construction company. I think maybe a little bit more small business, but they're using video, and a lot of it is how-to video, which is still telling a story, right? But they're sharing knowledge, but they're doing it in a form I think is a way to tell a story, and they're using visuals, a visual medium to do that. I don't know. Are there other examples? I can't recall. Oh, this is the same kind of thing. Here's another example. Same kind of as the last. But let's move on to this one. Now, we're at the interest level here. Maybe all that we just showed you was more awareness level. This is actually an ebook / white paper that focused on, again, this was in the contact center industry, that focused on the high cost of agent attrition. Contact center agent turnover is very typically very high. And so that's the conflict. Now, the character in this story was not the agent. The character in the story is the head of customer service, or maybe the CXO at a company, right? They're the character that we're trying to appeal to. And the problem that they have is they've got turnover going on in their customer service department. So our resolution, which we present, notice it says in bold, there is a solution: diversification through the use of dedicated outsourced providers. Now, that's a story. It has a character, it has conflict, and it has a resolution. It's not, again, we're not writing some fiction or some novel here. This is an ebook, or if you want to call it a white paper, whatever, that basically tells a story. And so hopefully all of these things are making sense to people, like, oh yeah, I get that. I can do that. So character, conflict, resolution, that's the story. Who's the character? What is the problem? What is the question? How can your brand help solve it? It comes really down to that. And, when I think about it, at the beginning, I said, think about your ideal customer prospect. That's the character. What is the problem they have? That's the conflict. How can you solve it? That's the resolution. Now, can you do that in a story form to gain customer attention and trust, to communicate value, and distinguish your brand from competitors? So
Not
that's
easy,
that's
but
that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, as they say.
Right, I thought I'd done it with Super Hank. Now I think I'm going to go back to the drawing board and find simpler, easier ways to do it with your help next to me. I'm going to ask you a question just before you leave, because I know that we're strapped for time today, and I don't want you running late. These are our microsites, which are smart sites, which our customers are using: channel sales, acquisition, and retention. What sort of level you said there's of the funnel would they be best suited for, in your opinion?
Well, and these are kind of content hubs. Is that another way to cast them? And what you call them, smart sites. I'm going to call them story sites.
Let's call them a story site. Okay.
We'll just use that. Okay.
I've also got. We can also.
Well, first of all, let me ask you this: if you know, who is the character in this story? Is it a certain C-suite person or something?
It's a C-suite person. So it's been addressed directly to. In this case, it's been addressed to Santiago. Oops, I've gone backwards. Oops, I've gone the wrong way.
You're really going backwards, yeah.
Yes, I have. So in this case, the brand is at the top. It's addressed to the customer personally.
Okay. Right.
And the story is, well, let's get acquainted, Santiago. And it tells them their pain points, and it carries on. This is how we can solve your pain point, and here's a customer testimonial. So maybe they've put a little bit of everything.
I think so.
They shouldn't have done. They've done a story funnel in a story site.
It's not linear necessarily, because the first thing I see is this is what we do, which sounds like a brand story, which might be more at the awareness level. Obviously, you're getting acquainted, which you just say, Santiago, let's get acquainted. But then you're also maybe addressing some of the problems, tech talent shortage, so that may be a problem. I like that, obviously, using different media. Here's Pinterest or something, right? So I think, to me, story, and this is a good example, is certainly a good example as any. Story is ideal for awareness. It's ideal for interest consideration. But I also think it can be used at the decision-making level too, particularly where you're using customer stories, customer testimonial for social proof, that kind of thing. Customer feedback, it's not just one way either. It's a conversation you're having. But I like this. I think you could probably span all three of those levels, maybe weighted toward the top and middle more so.
All right, so I think one day soon I'll call you into a private call, and we'll create one. We'll create a perfect template for our customers, and we'll use that for them as a conclusion for today's session.
Excellent. Just character, conflict, resolution. How can your brand incorporate storytelling in as many different ways as possible? And we've talked about the benefits, so I won't reiterate, but it's all good. If nothing else, hopefully it's got people thinking about using story as a means of communication, and give it a shot, give it a try. I'm not here to promote myself necessarily, but I did say end with a call to action. So, if you want me to help you, I'll be happy to.
And where can we find you?
Well, prescriptive writing, which is not the easiest. Prescriptivewriting.com is my website. I finally got around to branding myself. You can always find me on LinkedIn. That's kind of where I mainly hang out. But my website's prescriptivewriting.com. Because much of my writing is prescriptive. It's how to. It's task oriented. It's presenting the solution. So that's why I came up with the name. But that's where you can find me on the web. And don't be underwhelmed. You'll be underwhelmed by my site. I'm not a designer, but anyway, I do love storytelling.
Everything Paul does is absolutely amazing. I fell in love with all of his work the moment I met him, and his counsel and advice and mentorship. So, you see the little halo on top of his head.
Just my halo, yeah. All right. Well, thank you for the time. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
So thank you very much and sharing your wisdom with us. And I think I'm left with, I thought I knew how to storytell. I don't. And I need to differentiate brand, audience, and individual storytelling. So thank you for that.
All right.
And the rest of you, we shall see you next week with another episode of LinkedIn Live.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks. Thank you, Paul.
Bye. See ya.